Have you ever felt a profound disconnect from the world around you? A sense that the values everyone chases, wealth, status, endless possessions, are a grand illusion, a beautifully decorated cage for the soul? Do you ever look at the relentless pursuit of more and feel a deep, quiet yearning for something simpler, something more real, more aligned with your own inner truth? If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like an ancient soul navigating a modern maze of materialism, then this message is your sign. You are not alone, and you are not misguided. What you are sensing is a timeless wisdom, a truth that has echoed through the ages. Let this be a moment of validation for your spirit. If you feel this deep connection, like and subscribe, and share your journey in the comments below with a simple "I resonate," because your story is part of a much larger awakening. In the sun-drenched heart of ancient Greece, a world that birthed democracy and laid the foundations of Western thought, a powerful current flowed beneath the surface of its gleaming marble temples and bustling agoras. This current was an insatiable thirst for wealth. It was more than a mere means of survival. It was the very lifeblood of the social order, a tangible measure of a man's worth. Wealth was the key that unlocked the doors of power, the silent arbiter of influence, and the ultimate symbol of divine favor. The city-state, the polis, was the grand stage upon which this drama unfolded. It was a crucible of ambition, where the clinking of coins could be louder than the pronouncements of orators, where a man's social standing and his political clout were not just influenced by his lineage, but increasingly dictated by the weight of his purse. This was a radical departure from the archaic societies that preceded it, where the aristocracy was a closed circle, defined exclusively by noble birthright and the vast tracts of ancestral land they controlled. The emergence of the classical period, however, ushered in a new era. The rise of trade, a vibrant network of exchange that stretched across the sapphire waters of the Aegean and beyond, began to fundamentally reshape these ancient power dynamics. A new class of men, the merchants, began to ascend. Once viewed as little more than functional facilitators of exchange, mere middlemen in the great flow of goods, they began to amass fortunes that were truly staggering. Their wealth, liquid and dynamic, began to rival and even eclipse the landed riches of the traditional, hereditary elite. This seismic shift in the economic landscape created deep and profound tensions that rippled through every layer of Greek society. Wealth, no longer a static inheritance, became a powerful tool for social mobility, a ladder that allowed ambitious men to climb beyond the station of their birth. For the first time, some found it possible to challenge the established, almost sacred hierarchy that had stood for generations. Yet, this new dynamism came at a cost. The very transformation that offered opportunity to some also carved a deeper, more painful chasm between the fabulously rich and the desperately poor. The working class, a vast and diverse group composed of hard-working farmers tending to their olive groves and vineyards, skilled artisans in their workshops, and laborers whose sweat built the very monuments that glorified the city, found themselves in an ever more precarious position. They became increasingly dependent on the complex and often unforgiving economic policies dictated by the wealthy elite, their lives and livelihoods subject to the whims of men whose realities were a world away from their own. In the great city of Athens, for example, the growing inequalities became so severe that they threatened to tear the very fabric of the polis apart. It was in this volatile climate that the statesman Solon introduced his famous reforms, a series of laws designed to mitigate the crushing debt and social unrest that plagued the city. He sought to create a more balanced and just society, to rein in the excesses of the wealthy and offer a measure of protection to the poor. And yet, despite these noble efforts, the obsession with wealth persisted. It had become an inescapable force, a phantom that haunted the Greek consciousness, shaping its politics, its art, and its very understanding of a meaningful life. The political landscape of ancient Greece was inextricably sculpted by the power of money. Even in Athens, the celebrated birthplace of democracy, the advent of this revolutionary form of governance did not eliminate the pervasive influence of wealth. It merely changed its form, making it more subtle, more insidious. While in theory, all free male citizens could participate in the governance of their city. The reality was that true political influence often remained concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. The ability to sponsor grand public works, to fund costly military campaigns, or to support magnificent artistic endeavors granted the elite a level of prestige and public goodwill that translated directly into political leverage, a soft power that the common man could never hope to match. In more overtly oligarchic city-states like Sparta, a society renowned for its austerity and martial discipline, wealth was less ostentatious, but it still played a crucial, albeit more clandestine, role. The Spartan system officially discouraged the accumulation of personal riches, valuing collective strength and military prowess above all else. Yet, even here, the ruling class maintained iron-fisted control over vast resources, ensuring their unshakable dominance and perpetuating a rigid social order. This profound duality, where wealth was simultaneously a necessity for life and a potent source of corruption, fueled intense and enduring philosophical debates about the very role of money in society. Could wealth coexist with virtue? Or was it an inherently corrupting force, a poison that inevitably eroded the moral character of both the individual and the state? These were not merely abstract questions for intellectual diversion. They struck at the very heart of the Greek search for the good life. These profound inquiries would later become central to the philosophies of the three giants of Greek thought: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The great philosophers of Greece held deeply complex and often conflicting relationships with the concept of money and material wealth. Their perspectives were not monolithic. Rather, they represented a spectrum of thought that reflected the deep anxieties and contradictions of their time. Socrates, the enigmatic figure who wandered the streets of Athens engaging citizens in relentless questioning, lived a life of remarkable, almost defiant, poverty. For him, the pursuit of wisdom and self-knowledge was the ultimate good, an endeavor so far superior to the accumulation of material gain that the two were scarcely comparable. He openly and scathingly criticized those who valued wealth above character, who spent their lives chasing shadows while neglecting the cultivation of their own soul. He argued with unwavering conviction that true fulfillment came not from external possessions, but from the rigorous process of self-examination and the continuous pursuit of intellectual and moral growth. His life itself was a testament to his philosophy, a living embodiment of the idea that a man's true wealth resides within. Plato, his most brilliant student, took these foundational ideas and developed them into a more structured and systematic political philosophy. In his masterpiece, The Republic, he envisioned an ideal state, a society governed not by the wealthy or the powerful, but by a ruling class of philosopher kings. These enlightened leaders, he proposed, would live communally, free from the corrupting influence of personal wealth and private property. Plato believed that the desire for material possessions was a primary source of corruption, a powerful temptation that could divert even the most well-intentioned leaders from the path of justice and the common good. By removing this temptation, he sought to create a state where governance was truly a matter of reason and virtue, untainted by personal greed. Aristotle, a student of Plato, offered a more pragmatic and nuanced perspective. He acknowledged the practical necessity of money and property in a functioning society, recognizing that a certain level of material well-being was necessary for a person to live a flourishing life. However, he also issued a stern warning against the dangers of excess. Aristotle argued for a golden mean, a principle of moderation in all things, including the acquisition of wealth. In his view, wealth should serve as a tool to facilitate life's higher purpose, support a family, to engage in civic life, to pursue intellectual and artistic endeavors rather than becoming an end in itself, a tyrannical force that dominated and defined a person's existence. Yet, while these towering thinkers debated the intricate ethical dimensions of money, they largely accepted its presence in society as a given reality. It was another, more radical group of philosophers who would challenge its very foundations, the Cynics. They did not just critique the role of wealth, they took the most radical stance imaginable, rejecting it outright and embracing a life of voluntary poverty. This extreme rejection of materialism was not merely a philosophical posture. It was a direct and confrontational challenge to the core values of Greek society. The Cynics emerged as a powerful counterculture movement, a visceral reaction against the growing materialism and perceived hypocrisy of their time. They saw wealth not as a tool or a status symbol, but as a profound distraction, an artificial construct that enslaved people to an endless cycle of unnecessary desires. Rather than seeking comfort, status, or luxury, they pursued a state of absolute self-sufficiency, which they called autarkeia, and dedicated themselves to living in perfect accordance with nature. To the Cynics, civilization had imposed a web of artificial needs and conventions that served only to create dependency, anxiety, and inequality. The most famous and arguably the most radical of these thinkers was Diogenes of Sinope, a man who would take this philosophy to its most theatrical and unforgettable extreme. He did not merely critique wealth, he ridiculed it, challenged its legitimacy, and lived his life in a way that made a constant, living mockery of society's obsession with money. If Greek culture revered wealth, Diogenes sought to prove, through the sheer force of his own existence, that one could live a full and profoundly meaningful life without it. His life would become a living testament to the idea that true freedom was not found in accumulating riches, but in shedding them. Interestingly, Diogenes of Sinope was not born into poverty, nor was he initially a man who rejected wealth. His early life was intimately tied to the world of money in a way that would ironically shape his future philosophy in a completely unexpected and dramatic manner. His father was a banker in the Greek city of Sinope on the Black Sea, responsible for the minting of the city's currency. This connection to the very engine of commerce took a dramatic turn when Diogenes was accused of defacing coins, literally tampering with the currency. Whether this was a genuine act of fraud or an early symbolic expression of his disdain for the conventions of wealth remains a topic of historical debate. Some accounts suggest he was merely caught in a scandal involving his father, while others believe he intentionally sought to deface the currency in both a literal and a deeply philosophical sense, to challenge the arbitrary value that society placed upon it. Regardless of the exact circumstances, the event was cataclysmic. It led to his exile, forcing him to leave behind his home, his status, and whatever wealth he may have had. From this moment of profound crisis and dislocation, he embarked on a journey that would redefine the very meaning of freedom and necessity. Instead of trying to reclaim a conventional life, to rebuild his fortune and social standing, Diogenes embraced his exile as a radical opportunity, an opportunity to question everything society deemed valuable, starting with money itself. Arriving in Athens as an outcast, Diogenes found profound inspiration in the teachings of Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates and one of the earliest proponents of Cynicism. Antisthenes had already begun advocating for a life of virtue, free from the trappings of luxury and excess. But Diogenes would take these ideas to their absolute extreme. He discarded all possessions except for the most basic essentials: a simple cloak, a wooden staff, and a small bowl for eating and drinking. And even the bowl was eventually deemed unnecessary. The story goes that one day he saw a child drinking water from his cupped hands and, realizing he had been carrying a superfluous object, promptly threw his own bowl away. This radical approach to life was not an act of mere deprivation, it was a deliberate and profound philosophical stance. He sought a state of perfect self-sufficiency, or autarkeia, to free himself entirely from dependence on anything external, be it possessions, people, or societal approval. Unlike other philosophers who theorized about the dangers of wealth while still living in relative comfort, Diogenes chose to embody his beliefs completely and uncompromisingly. He did not simply critique the world, he lived in direct, stark opposition to it, turning himself into a living argument against materialism. His most famous rejection of wealth and power came in his legendary encounter with Alexander the Great. The young conqueror, who was in the process of subjugating the known world, was fascinated by the reputation of this strange philosopher who lived in a ceramic jar. Alexander sought him out and, Standing before the sunbathing Diogenes with his retinue of powerful generals, offered to grant him anything he desired. Most men would have asked for riches, power, or land, but Diogenes had no use for such things. He would mock the wealthy, challenge social conventions, and engage in public acts like eating in the marketplace or even defecating in the theater that were meant to shock people into questioning their own values. His life was not one of mere provocation. It was a rigorous philosophical experiment. He believed that human beings should live according to nature, unburdened by the artificial expectations imposed by society. He slept in a large ceramic jar, ate whatever he could find, and relentlessly ridiculed the need for luxury. Where others saw poverty, he saw freedom. While many pitied him, he pitied them in return, believing they were the ones who were truly trapped, slaves to their own ambitions, constantly chasing wealth, comfort, and approval. For Diogenes, true wealth was not measured in possessions, but in the ability to need nothing. His life was a challenge, a question posed to the world. If you can be happy with nothing, then what power does money truly have over you? To Diogenes, money was not just unnecessary, it was a grand illusion, a construct that enslaved people without them even realizing it. Unlike physical needs, such as food and shelter, which were dictated by nature, money was a human invention that created a web of artificial dependencies. People spent their entire lives accumulating it, believing it would bring them security or happiness. Yet, the pursuit of wealth only deepened their enslavement. The more one had, the more one feared losing it. The rich became prisoners of their own possessions, constantly guarding their status, while the poor became trapped in endless labor just to survive. Diogenes saw this cycle as profoundly absurd. He rejected the very premise that wealth was needed for a meaningful life. He demonstrated through his own existence that by stripping away unnecessary desires, one could achieve a level of freedom impossible for even the wealthiest rulers. His contempt for money was not simply theoretical, it was a direct attack on the very structures that upheld Greek society. This radical stance finds powerful echoes in later critiques of capitalism and materialism. Karl Marx, centuries later, would argue that economic systems create illusions of freedom while reinforcing dependence on the wealthy. Henry David Thoreau, like Diogenes, would advocate for simplicity and self-sufficiency, seeing wealth as a distraction from life's deeper truths. Even modern thinkers warn of the psychological traps of consumerism, where people define their worth through their possessions. Diogenes was one of the first to recognize this cycle, long before capitalism or industrial economies existed. His rejection of money was not primitive, it was prophetic. He saw with startling clarity what many still struggle to understand, that wealth is only valuable if you believe in its importance. The moment you stop chasing it, you become free. At the core of Diogenes' philosophy was the pursuit of ataraxia, a state of inner peace and tranquility that could only be achieved by freeing oneself from unnecessary desires. Unlike the Stoics, who sought tranquility through rational self-control, or the Epicureans, who pursued moderate pleasure, the Cynics believed that true freedom came from rejecting social conventions altogether. Diogenes took this idea to its extreme, reducing his needs to the absolute minimum. To outsiders, his lifestyle seemed like miserable poverty, but to him, it was a declaration of independence. He had stripped life down to its bare essentials, proving that a person could exist without luxury, without possessions, and without concern for societal expectations. In doing so, he exposed the absurdity of those who spent their lives chasing status and wealth, believing them to be the sources of happiness. Diogenes was not merely indifferent to status, he actively ridiculed it. He mocked Plato, calling his grand philosophical ideas useless distractions. When Plato defined a human as a featherless biped, Diogenes famously plucked a chicken, brought it into Plato's academy, and declared, "Behold, a man." He saw Plato's elaborate theories as detached from reality, the product of a mind trapped by the same intellectual vanity he claimed to transcend. This lesson is perhaps even more relevant today than it was in ancient Greece. In a world consumed by consumerism, status anxiety, and the never-ending pursuit of wealth, Diogenes offers a radical alternative. What if the solution isn't to have more, but to need less? His philosophy isn't just about minimalism, it's about reclaiming autonomy, refusing to be controlled by external forces, and questioning the very foundations of modern life. His extreme choices may not be for everyone, but the underlying truth remains. Happiness is not dictated by possessions, but by our ability to live in alignment with our true needs. Diogenes forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Are we truly free, or are we slaves to money and social expectation? How much of what we chase is genuinely necessary, and how much is simply imposed by the world around us? If everything we believe to be important were stripped away, would we still know who we are? These are not easy questions, but they are essential ones. The life of Diogenes is not an instruction manual, it is a mirror. And what we see in that mirror depends entirely on how willing we are to confront the illusions we live by. Ultimately, Diogenes left behind no wealth, no possessions, and no power. And yet, over 2 millennia later, we are still talking about him. Perhaps that in itself is proof that he was right all along.